Thanks for joining this video class on design thinking. The reason why we at CoSchool wanted to create this free, simple class is because design thinking as a process has been largely misunderstood, and communities who are facing crisis need what design thinking has to offer to find new ways forward. That's it. To clarify and simplify the design thinking process in a way that helps communities facing crisis find a way forward. Here's what this class looks like. It's just one video, so you can just sit back, relax, listen to what we're going to talk through, and take some notes as you do so. There's no quiz at the end, but there is an invitation. The invitation is going to be to find new ways to actually practice what we're talking about. So the outline, what to expect while you're doing that listening and note-taking and planning for getting some practice, is like this. We want to give you a clearer definition of what design thinking is. Second, invite you into some key mind shifts that are required to do design thinking well. Third, talk through the design thinking double diamond. That's the visualization of the design thinking process. Fourth, offer a couple stories and examples of design thinking coming to life. And then talk a little bit about when it fits, what it requires, and some common criticisms and responses to what folks sometimes levy against design thinking, so we can find a healthier way forward. And that's it. If you're ready for that, let's dive in. Design thinking, at its heart, is a process of creative problem solving. To understand that, it's probably best to contrast it with conventional problem solving. Conventionally, when we think of problem solving, a problem shows up and we want to move to a solution as swiftly as possible. So we begin moving in that left to right linear A to B direction to get to a checkbox. And inevitably, things pop up that block us from actually making that trip. Things like people and their ideas, alternate approaches that could take us off track. And so we aim to dipsy doodle around that and still get to that checkbox solution as swiftly as possible. That is one way to get to a solution. But creative problem solving would say, wait, if there are people here and if there are ideas here, how can we host the space to actually listen to those people and explore those ideas to see what else might emerge? And what if it wasn't just one person moving expediently to solve the problem as quick as possible, but what if this was a collective effort? What if it was co-creative? So design thinking is going to give you a process or a framework for involving a community in a process of creative problem solving so that you can get to an end outcome that you didn't anticipate. You want an outcome that you couldn't anticipate because if you already knew the answer, you'd be doing it already. So this is clearly going to help you in times when you need a new way forward. To do design thinking well, there's two key mind shifts that you need to be invited into. The first is to recognize that the problem is different than the solution. Problem solving would have you believe that it is the problem that is to be solved, but in fact, those are two distinct activities. The first is understanding the problem. Some might even say falling in love with the problem. If you can really understand what's at the heart of the challenges faced by a community, if you can really explore that in a way that gives nuance, that gives compassion and empathy, and that draws on lived experience, that is rooted in mutuality and reciprocity, where we're hearing stories from each other, that's understanding the problem. And once we've done that, it's appropriate to ask, how might we explore new solutions? What's possible that we haven't tried yet? It's important to note that sometimes if you've just created the space to hear and to listen, that is often enough. Listening is a transformative act, and helping people feel heard so that their problems are seen and recognized and that a human relationship is built. That alone matters. And if you have community participation, if you have community consent, then moving forward into this second process of finding solutions, that's its own beautiful journey. where we get to ask, what are some things we haven't tried? What is out there that we haven't explored yet? To really spend the time investigating alternatives, doing the work of ideation and innovation to explore solutions that are worth testing. So the mind shift I'm talking about here is that the problem is different from the solution. But as you can hear, there's so much in the process already of design thinking that gets me excited because I see its power to bring about transformation and change in communities, that it's rooted in relationships. The second mindset shift to be thinking about is we get to stay open before we close down. To stay open before we close down, we need to diverge before we converge. We need to listen before we summarize. It's this repeated action of diverging and then converging that is the model, that is the hallmark, you could say, of the design thinking process. Staying open to ideas, staying open to what might emerge is a crucial first posture before we move towards narrowing down what we've understood to be true. When we take these two mindset shifts, we quickly see them visualized in what's called the design thinking double diamond. It's a visualization of the design thinking process, and it shows first these two concepts that we just talked about. You'll see first the problem is different from the solution, and secondly, you'll see these two processes of diverging and converging. Diverging and then converging. That's why it's the double diamond, because it's these two moves of staying open before narrowing down. And each one of these moments is a phase of the process that has a name. The first part is the process of discovering. To discover is to listen, and there are many ways in a design thinking process that we can listen to the community's needs. We can do one-on-one interviews, we can do group workshops, we can do town halls, we can do online surveys. We can explore in so many ways to build relational connections, to understand the heartbeat of a community's reality. That's what takes place in Discover. And when we stay open, we're going to hear new stories we haven't heard before. We're going to encounter new insights that will really matter. And it's in the listening that the change happens. It's through the genuine partnership and connection that is built that change starts to occur, and it changes at a heart level. From Discover, then, we move into the phase of define. To define is to clarify or to synthesize or to summarize. It's a way of bringing simpler, clearer explanations to the heart of what you just heard. So how do you bring that to greater clarity? Sometimes that involves working with the community to actually bring about some summary artifacts. It might look like a persona or two, an empathy map, or an experience map. You might do the work of affinity mapping, which is a workshop-based activity with community to structure and categorize the different insights into key statements that you then write together to serve as the leading summaries of all that data and insights you gathered. So once we've defined, we've really done that first element of the design thinking double diamond. Discover and to define is to then say, we've got an okay understanding of the problem at hand. Moving through this part can take a short amount of time or a long amount of time, depending on what the community's capacity is for moving through this. Sometimes in the case of a design sprint, you might move through something like that in a couple days. Or you might take several months to really go deep, to move to where a community is at, to really go deep in your relationship building and your listening, and then do the work to accurately and faithfully synthesize those perspectives into a clear definition. But the scope of a design thinking process is really up to you to design once you understand what you're trying to accomplish. At the center of the design thinking double diamond is building the how might we question. The how might we question tends to follow a simple Mad Lib style formula, which helps orient you towards the type of solutions you're about to explore. It takes the insights you gathered and puts it into a sentence form so you can ask that question and go exploring. It goes like this: how might we help the name of the specific community become more future state using this specific medium or constraint? So you're going to name the community that you've just been exploring with. You're going to identify a future state or a hope that is shared with that community for how we want to grow. And then bring into play any sort of constraint or medium that you know you're going to be focusing your creative efforts on. And once you have your how might we question, it really opens a lot of doors for creative exploration. See, where we started at the design thinking process was all we had was a problem and a community willing to explore it. But a question opens doors. It opens possibilities. A problem keeps those doors shut. So with a good, generative, creative question with a healthy amount of tension in it, an unsolved problem worth exploring with a community that gets to go along with you, that can do a lot. And there's a lot of power in those three simple words, how might we? How means that it's a question. You're actually asking it. Might is so different from a word like should or a word like will, which is going to say there's one right way and we are obligated to do it. Might says there are possibilities here. We're going to keep it open. We're going to keep it loose as we explore what might happen. And that word we, so short, but it means so much. It means we're in this together. It means we're doing this in a co-creative way. It means it's us. So when we see those words, how might we hear a generative question open to possibility that is driven by community. And you've got the heart of a design thinking process right there. The latter half of the double diamond is develop and to deliver. To develop is to explore new ideas, to generate possibilities, to put what you could do on the table, to stretch your brain and collective imagination a little bit to see what else is out there that you haven't already considered. Again, if you already had the solution, you'd be doing it already, so you want to stay open this phase to consider what else is possible. Here, you might do some creative ideation exercises that involve some paper sketching. You might do some interesting brainstorming exercises, maybe even AI supported. You might look to nature and do a bit of biomimicry. You might look outside your industry or within your industry to see what else is going on. But you're going to create this space, usually in a workshop setting, and sometimes through personal journaling and personal sketching, to create lots and lots of potential ideas. What could we do here? Because as we diverge again, that's where new insights emerge. And emergence is the phenomenon of the aha moment. It's the epiphany that takes place. When we create room for alternative possibilities, for new imaginings, for seeing what else is out there, then we have the opportunity to discover new ways forward. And it's really important here to keep in mind what comes next, which is to deliver. In design thinking, deliver refers to getting to a testable solution, a possible prototypable option. It's a way of saying, let's take all of these possible scenarios we just came up with, filter it down according to a few key pieces of criteria. What's going to meet the community's need? What do we actually have the ability to implement? And once you find a few ideas or one idea that meets that criteria, you make a workable, testable prototype of it to bring it back to the community to say, is this worth making? Is this worth spending our time, our effort, our resources on, turning it into a project to make happen? And if it is, then the design thinking process has faithfully led you through a journey of listening, understanding, imagining, and testing, and proving the value of something worth doing. And it's then that you get to embark on a journey of implementation, of execution. You've got an idea that the community has co-created and tested that's ready to build into a real life project. And that's where design thinking can take you, all the way from we have nothing but a problem and a community into we have a possibility. We have an open door and something we're going to try now. I want to offer a couple stories of design thinking in action so we can see how it works. The first comes from our partners at the United Way of British Columbia. A couple of years ago, we had the opportunity to host a week-long design sprint with them, and they were coming with a really curious question. They didn't want to see dollars just flow through organizations that then serve clients that may or may not have a relational connection with any of the people along the way. Instead, they wondered, how can the community be activated to use their own resources and energy to really make change at a neighborhood level? What a neat question. So they did lots of conversing with community members. They did lots of exploring about how other situations explore challenges like this. And they came up with a few ideas. And they found an idea. And then they implemented that idea. And the idea ended up being called Hello Neighbor. And it's an online initiative that any neighborhood in British Columbia could apply to get a micro grant to host specific interventions or community happenings right there where they are on their own street or block. And that Hi Neighbor initiative ended up being copied in a few different regions. It was so successful. Now, unfortunately, as the COVID pandemic introduced new restrictions, it went on pause for a bit. But the idea of having come into a session with an idea of a problem that needed to be solved, generating a solution and actually doing it, and seeing the results come to life with communities activated with their own energy is a beautiful example of the power of design thinking when it's matched with resources that are ready to actually implement. Another story I wanted to share comes from, again, another one of our partners called Cohere. Now, a number of years ago, there was a church in Vancouver that noticed that their parking lot was largely unused for most of the week, while meanwhile, people in the city were struggling with an affordable housing crisis. And so they got together. They explored what the community's needs were, and they asked themselves what they were willing to do. And they decided to actually turn their parking lot into an affordable housing project. They would put community care at the heart of it. And after that, the team that led that effort recognized that that same transformation could be useful all across Canada. So they're building a new organization that partners with faith communities to help them explore those things. What underutilized assets do we have? And what needs do we have in our community that need to be met? So that they can equip them with a process to actually go and build new solutions. They're turning that into a whole different organization. And while in that context, it was a group of people following more of an entrepreneurial, social innovation hunch. What they did was a natural, intuitive following of the design thinking process, where they listened, they defined, they explored, they built, and they made something happen. And it shows that when we see this process as not just a formula to follow, but a true posture of innovation to strike, change can really be made at a community level that can strike at the heart of some of our most long-standing challenges that we face today. You might be wondering when design thinking really fits in the life of an organization or a community. It's a really good question. In fact, sometimes when design thinking is chosen as a pathway and it doesn't fit, it can do more harm than good. It can disenfranchise a community. It can create a sense of wasted time. It's important to really ask that question. Are we choosing a process that really fits what our needs are? Here's a few ways to consider that. One, as you've been hearing throughout this, is you're really going to need a community that has some energy and interest and capacity and ownership of a shared problem area. That's going to be one of the key ingredients. The second is the problem itself. If it's a type of problem that can already be solved or already has been solved, like an expert knows the answer or an individual knows the answer, you probably don't need design thinking. It's uniquely for scenarios where you want to find a new way forward, an alternate way forward, a customized, personalized, specific way forward rooted in the needs of a community. Sometimes the word complexity is used to describe that type of problem. It's where there's a lot of different forces and elements swirling around that are kind of hard to nail down, that mean that it's outside the expertise of just one profession. But in fact, many different people with different parts of the puzzle would need to come together in order to solve that. So if you have a complex challenge, it's one that would lend itself well to design thinking. And the other is if you're in a situation where you have the ability to really commit and be immersed, and your community is ready to commit and be immersed in this, where it can be something that people say yes to seeing through. Again, we don't want it to be tokenized. We don't want it to just be the type of lip service exercise that a leader says they're going to do, but then has not really matched it with the reality around them. So that's when design thinking can really fit. What does design thinking require of us as participants? Well, as you're hearing, it will require some familiarization with the toolkit. There's many different tools here, from interviewing to synthesizing, and there's skills along the way that'll help us, such as facilitating, community engagement, paper prototyping, you name it. A lot of hard skills, but hard skills that are concrete and that are learnable. On the soft skills side, one of the key things that I would say design thinking takes is authenticity. Authenticity on behalf of the person hosting the process or the group hosting the process means that by definition, they care about the challenge and that they're part of the community. If a design thinking process is being facilitated only by a neutral professional outsider who doesn't have a stake, you run the risk of turning this into kind of a circus, just a show, just a piece of theater. But if those that are part of the process really do have an authentic stake in the community's transformation, then it's more likely that we're going to get to a place that has those healthy outcomes that we're looking for. So authenticity is another key requirement for those that would choose to say yes to a design thinking process. That, and as we've said many times before, a community that's ready to engage. Let's talk through a couple common criticisms that we hear people bring against design thinking. Often what a criticism is, it's people pointing out what's wrong because really there's a hope that it could be better. So let's take a look at that. Let's look at the criticisms so we can see how to turn them into ways to do design thinking better. One of the criticisms is that design thinking is sometimes wasteful and results in ideas that can't be executed, or that it doesn't help you do the executing. And that's fair. If you've created a process where you're moving through a flow of ideation to come up with ideas, but you haven't considered either the needs of the community or the community's capacity to execute, and if you haven't considered your resources when filtering the ideas you're going to choose, it's very likely that a design thinking process could generate ideas that cannot be done. So this is where our scope and our constraints come into play. We can create a design thinking process that takes into account the community's capacity. And therefore, when ideas are being developed and then also delivered, that which is being tested has that in mind. We're asking ourselves the question of, can we do this? Can we make it happen? Because that is beyond the scope of what design thinking helps with. The act of actually executing the idea, that is a separate flow. That's project management, that's entrepreneurship, that's building a business or an organization. That's work. Design thinking is uniquely an innovation process. It's to come up with the idea, ideally an idea that can be implemented. But after that, there is a baton pass that takes place. There is a new energy and a new focus that needs to come about if you're ready to implement the idea that you have tested. So keeping that in mind, the design thinking process doesn't have to be wasteful. It doesn't have to lead to ideas that don't get executed, but it means that readiness on behalf of the participants to receive in that relay race the baton that says, now we're turning this into something we're going to go build. Okay. Another criticism that folks can bring against design thinking is that it's formulaic. It says, move from A to B, but how often does that work? Is that really what innovation is like? No, it's not. You're right. But a healthy comparison might be to other forms of organic, natural, creative experiences. I think of music. Music is really, it's an emotional connection and an expression, and it can also be reduced to sheet music, just notes on a page which mean nothing. Both are valuable and both have a different place. There's the experience of music and there's the expression of music. And there's a relationship between the two. Or I think of a process that's as far-reaching and embodied and personal as childbirth. The experience of being pregnant and bringing another being into this world is entirely all-encompassing. And there are books written about what it's like. One such as The Birth Partner, which would help those who are assisting a partner through the birthing process to know what to expect. It would be silly to say the book is childbirth. No, it's a description of it. William Gibson, the science fiction writer, has a quote where he says, "The maps are not the territories," right? The topographical sketch is not the same as the land. And in design thinking, it's simply a description of the creative process. But the creative process is this full-bodied, intuitive, innovative flow, which can sometimes be unpredictable. And yeah, it's important to acknowledge that. The true things that you'll experience when actually going through a community-driven process of innovation is going to feel different than this simple formulaic process that we've walked through of the double diamond. One is a map, the other is the land. And if we know that we can be guided towards that process in a way that readies us for the real life we're about to step into. Another criticism that folks will bring up against design thinking is that it leads to extraction and increased capitalism. What that would look like is people using a design thinking process to connect with the community, to learn what their needs are, and then to go and build a product for profit to then sell back to that community. You've used empathy in a rather deceptive, extractive way to not build a relationship, to not empower a community, but to take those insights and commercialize it into another element of consumerism. That has happened time and time again in business contexts where a community says yes to being part of, say, a research undertaking, only to find that their very secret sauce, the way they've been solving a problem already, the situation that they've been handling at a community level, is now turned into something that becomes unattainable. It's really important to name that as a risk. This is why at CoSchool we talk so much about design thinking being a community level endeavor. Because when it's used to really empower community, when the ideas, the solutions, the relationships are staying within community, when the building of the project is staying within community, it is the community that rises, the community that benefits. And when we have situations where a third party, an external source is coming in, especially with commercial aims to run this process, that's where we begin to see the strength diminish. The relationship link gets weakened. So it's a very valid criticism, and it's very important to recognize that design thinking is best stewarded within community, by community, and for community. We've covered a lot in this short amount of time. We've talked about design thinking and what it really is. The mind shifts that are required to really see that the problem is different from the solution, and we open before we close. We've talked through the design thinking double diamond of discover, define, the how might we question, develop, and deliver. We've talked through a couple stories. We talked about Cohere, the housing organizations that works with faith communities. We've talked about United Way's Hello Neighbor initiative. We've talked about when it fits, looking for complex challenges facing a community. We've talked about what it requires, which really is authenticity. And we've addressed some common criticisms. Talking about making sure you can actually implement the solutions, seeing it as a guide to a process, seeing it as something that empowers a community. With all those things in place, then what's ahead is really getting more familiar with this tool set, with this framework, and getting practice. Getting practice can look like hosting your own workshops, hosting your own sessions, practicing as a facilitator. It can also look like getting a little bit more education on the topic. So CoSchool is here to support you in all of those endeavors. To study a little bit more of the tools and frameworks, we've got a really simple guide, the Pocket Guide to Design Thinking. It's available and captures a lot of the insights we talked about in this class, but in written form for your easy reference. There's a PDF download, and there's a paperback book you can buy on Amazon. We also offer educational experiences. So those can look like cohort-driven, applied, collaborative labs in your organization. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up on the CoSchool website. We also will be hosting public offerings with members of the community coming together to really practice this with each other. And lastly, at any time that you might need some support working with your community to design, to lead, to host, and to run design thinking processes that are truly community-centered, CoSchool's facilitation services are available as a support. So if you want to have any more conversations about this, if you've got questions, if you're curious, feel free to reach out anytime. We'd love to dig into more conversation with you. Thanks so much for joining, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your learning journey.